You may be seated. Now it's my pleasure to introduce someone we all know, our speaker, Sandra Levine. Sandra has been a member of Temple Amuna for 63 years. She's been a part of many committees, including managing the kitchen back when all of the food was cooked in-house, and she even catered David Ezekiel's bar mitzvah. For many years, Sandra chaired the bereavement committee. Sandra says that being part of the Temple Amuna community and giving back has been one of the most special parts of her life. On a personal note, Sandra, my Temple Amuna experience is enhanced by your presence, your grace, and the warmth you bring every Shabbat morning when you're here. Sandra will be sharing her story of growing up Jewish in London and how she became a member of Temple Amuna in 1962. Sandra.
Well, good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Yes? Okay. A little closer? Okay, a little closer. Okay. I have belonged to Temple Amuna since I was 24 years old, and we never took a year off like so many people do. No, we didn't. We didn't, because my tradition was to go to shul on Shabbat. And I'm going to tell you about an incident that affected my life when I was only 7 years old. I was born in London, England, and just in 1938. Just prior to the Second World War. My mother and her older sister, by chance, had been born in America and left when they were children, but always kept their American citizenship because they always knew that the American citizenship is the very best citizenship to have. So I was born in 1938, and the war broke out in September of 1939 in Europe, the Second World War. And of course, America wanted all of her citizens out of England because it was not a safe place. And the bombs started, etc. And so my father finally convinced my mother that it would be the right thing to do for us to come over to America. Her older sister had come over previously. She had lived in Antwerp with her husband and son, and they had come over and were living in Brooklyn. And so my mother, my brother, who was 6 years older than I am, came over to America. And I was 18 months old when I came. And virtually from the moment my mother arrived in America, she wanted to get back to England. She was very, very unhappy. My mother was a very, very attractive woman, and what went on, I don't know, but all I know is she turned up almost every week at the embassy to get back. And lo and behold, in 1943, in the middle of the war, we came back to England in a troop ship. And there's so many things that have happened in my life. I mean, I went across the Atlantic the first time when the war was going on, and ships were being sunk. And then in the middle of the war, we came back to England, and there were lots on a troop ship, and there were lots and lots of ships being sunk. But we arrived in England, and I was 4 years old. And my father had a big yellow shelter built in our garden. And so we had the shelter, and when the bombs were coming, we lived in a suburb of London. And then for a while we went to Bournemouth, which is a seaside area, to avoid the war. But we basically were in London, and my grandparents were living with us at the same time. So anyway, my life, here I was 7 years old when the war ended. The war in Europe ended in May. The war in the Pacific of 1945, and the war in the Pacific ended in September of 1945. But of course, you've got to remember that there was no television, there was just the radio, and if you wanted to see anything, you went to the cinema. And of course, we went to the cinema, the whole family, to what I'm sure some of you may remember, I don't know. They had what was called Movie Tone, which was a news program. And I don't know exactly when they stopped Movie Tone, but it was a really good program that was on when you went to the cinema. And I was only 7 years old, and I saw them liberate Auschwitz. I cannot tell you, as a 7-year-old child, seeing all these skeletons of people had a tremendous effect on me. And I put my head on my grandfather's shoulder, and I said, I'm going to be the best little Jewish girl there can be, so that everybody who meets me will know how good and nice Jewish people are. And I have to tell you that that's basically how I've lived my life. I've always gone to synagogue. I grew up virtually Orthodox, but not doing anything on Shabbat. We're going to the synagogue, but we did light lights, etc., you know. And when I was 11, I went to Hebrew school, and I came back and I said, I'm the only girl. I'm not going to Hebrew school. And my parents hired the rabbi from the Hebrew school who tutored me privately from the age of 11 to 15. So I've been a very, very lucky person. And I have to say that growing up in England, at the time I grew up, it was great being Jewish. There were so many clubs, there were so many outings, there were so many things. And really and truly, it's almost a miracle that I ended up in this country, because I was so happy in England. I was attending London University, and they had a trip to America. I had gone to Israel and wanted, of course, to live on a kibbutz. I was 17 years old. But somehow or other, it didn't work out for me. And instead, I went to university in England, and I had an opportunity to visit different universities in America. And I came to Waterville, Maine. I came with a group of 18 students from Europe, and we traveled in 2 station wagons. And my beshert, and I believe this with all my heart and soul, because I had a wonderful life in England, that my beshert was that we stopped at Waterville, Maine, the home of Colby College. And we traveled in 2 station wagons. And one of the wagons broke down. And the girl who was in charge, I traveled as a vegetarian, because I've always been kosher my whole life. And she asked me if I wanted a blind date. Well, in England, I didn't know what a blind date was, but okay, you know. I did already have a friend in England. Anyway, lo and behold, I met my beshert, my husband, Ralph Levine. He was at home working on his father's farm, and he was going to be a veterinarian. And I spent the weekend, and he showed me all around. And I had a week at the end of my trip, and in New York. And he came to New York to take me out, and then he turned up in England, and he turned up in England. And unfortunately, Ralph grew up in Waterville, Maine, and didn't have a Jewish education. And he was educated for his bar mitzvah by a tutor. But language, he was very, very smart in lots and lots of things, but when it came to Hebrew. And my father, when he came to England, sent him to a rabbi, and he tried his very best, but it was always very difficult. And I've been so fortunate, because I've been married for 64 years, and my husband was a wonderful man, and this was my destiny. And so I've been at Temple Emunah from the age of 24, and I'm now 87. And I'm so fortunate, because this is my family, and I feel that you are all my family, And I'm so happy to be here. And I thank you so much for listening to me. So.
Sandra, thank you so much.